In this module, we're going to discuss an introduction to online research. So there's different types of online research. So the primary one being transitional. And so what this is taking existing measures and putting them online. So these are measures that could be pen and paper measures, ones that have already been checked for validity. They've been checked to make sure that they are able to be used, and they may have been used in a face-to-face environment, but now they're put online. So it might be, say, like the Beck Depression Inventory, which was something that was created in mid-century generations ago, but now it's something that you can take online and you just complete it like a survey, whereas it used to be a pen and paper type of research assessment. So there's transitional, so it's taking what exists and putting it online. Phenomenological, which is something that is a measure that it actually studies the internet itself. So one of the things that's really neat about cyber psychology is we're also studying the phenomenon of cyber psychology. So we create these assessments that become very meta almost in nature. And so it's studying what is the impact itself of the internet. And so this actually may be something like computer internet use or even social media, or something that is really just looking at the internet itself. What are the dynamics of the internet, of communicating via the internet? There are studies that is actually studies and research that's done about conducting research online. So we're getting very meta at that point. And then there's novels. This is something that's completely unique to online research. So this may be a particular type of assessment that may not be studying the internet itself, but it's only done, say, with online research. So there's something about that particular study, and there's not a lot of studies that exist out there that are like this, but whatever it is, it's completely novel, it's completely unique to online research, and has likely only been around for a short amount of time. But primarily, you're going to see a lot of transitional and then phenomenological assessments and measures. And so you're looking at these, they often have reliability and validity already, and they're just taking the existing study measure and then putting it online. But again, when you change something, and this is why as we go through types of online research, we always want to be aware of is, how does the online medium impact the research that's being conducted? So can you do a transitional approach all the time where you're taking an existing measure and just putting it online? Is that always feasible? So anytime that you're conducting research, and maybe you're replicating a study that was done in the 80s or done, you want to modernize it, you have to take a look at the existing measures and the reliability and the validity of them, but then determine, can they actually transition to an online format, and what are the implications of that? And so that would be something that you would want to address, discuss, and perhaps go over with the IRB review process. But we always want to look to see, how does online research impact the research process, and how is online research different from face-to-face research? So first, there's the benefits of online data, right? And it's access to participants, access to hard to reach populations, reduce costs. So for some of this, so access to participants, so let's say that a lot of times before, you have to do a convenience sample. So using either college students or using people that were in your region or in your town or in your social network, and mailing them packets. And you had access to whatever resources you had. When you put something online, suddenly you're able to access people from around the world. So that if you actually wanted to do data about internet use in China, you actually could, without ever even having to step foot in China. So these hard to reach populations, that you're able to do research and find access to groups or membership clubs or discussion groups or something where there's hard to reach population. Reduce costs, you might not need an office, you might not need a lab setting. There's research anonymity. So one of the things that happens is there's demand characteristics, or the person who's conducting the research can often influence, whether they mean to or not, the research being conducted. So whether it's a peer, whether it's someone of a different gender or sex or age, that sometimes the researcher themselves can influence the study. It can be flexible and convenient. You're able to just blast out, say, a survey or send something out, and then it allows you to collect the data at all hours of the night. You're not necessarily confined to times that you can be in a lab. Sometimes, especially with qualitative data, you can observe the social behaviors. So you can actually go into a chat room and observe, and the term is lurker, but you can lurk in these chat rooms, you can observe, and you have this ability to be anonymous when you're online. So of course, there's ethical considerations when doing anonymous observation, but it does give you the ability to go in and say, if you were researching gaming behaviors or cyberbullying, you could actually watch and observe these social behaviors as they're actually happening in a way that it's harder to observe in a research environment. We have access to archival data, the ability to be able to save all that information. Prior to the internet or being able to save data on a computer, you would have researchers with just filing cabinets filled with research data of surveys and any kind of measures that they would use. All of that pen and paper measures would be saved. And so that the ability to go back and look at your data and look at previous data makes it much easier to be able to replicate studies, to be able to manipulate data. It prevents us from stigmatized identities, so similar to some of the anonymity or the demand characteristics or any stigmas that we might have about people that are being researched or that people doing the research. It's also a new social phenomenon. People are interested in it. They're interested in online research and online data, and it's easy. And so there's some benefit to the newness of it and the ability to attract participants in a way that the standard pen and paper measures don't always have that same appeal, especially as we look to digital natives and data collection. That when you're doing data collection on digital natives or anybody that has grown up with the internet, the ability to use the internet to collect the research may be better received. So there's definite benefits to online data collection, but of course with that comes the challenges of it. And so some of that challenge is being able to represent yourself and communicate clearly. So as we probably know from different communication mediums, that when you're communicating online, I'm sure in your life there's been times where you've typed something and the person on the other end completely misunderstands. There's no nonverbal communication. You have to make sure that you're representing everything. You're representing yourself, that you're communicating the instructions, that you are being able to clearly communicate and portray the research that you're doing in an online environment. Another chance of anonymity where it can backfire is your participants. So you're really taking on face value that if you are doing an online study about, say, college students who are between the ages 18 and 22, that the person who completed your survey or your questionnaire actually is that person. There's really nothing that says that it could be some 50-year-old person pretending to be somebody in your age demographic. So there can be some deception, there can be some fraud. We're taking it on face value that our participants are also being ethical. Sometimes there can also be lower response rates. The reason for this being people start a survey, they're maybe doing it at home, they get distracted. So the completion ratio is not always as strong as it is when you have somebody that is in your lab setting where they're there from start to finish. Sometimes people will start to participate, they mean well, and then they just sort of falter off by the end, or they skip questions. So in a way that's an online environment, you don't really have as much control over the environment too. So we're not able, we'll talk about this with ethical challenges, that you don't know where somebody is completing the measures. So are you going to be able to get a good standard of research, good quality of data, if somebody is completing a measure while their kids are screaming and crying around them? Or are they able to really be able to give honest feedback if they're doing this online participation and they have somebody who shares the room with them? Or when you know that somebody is in your lab or in a more traditional research collection setting, we know what it is that's happening, and we're able to control the environment in a way that we're also leaving the online participants up to control their own environment. We're not actually controlling it. The stimulus constraints, the technical problems, Again, all things that are out of our control with the environment. Technical problems are a big one. If you are, are you able to collect data when, are they running the software? If you are doing interviews, can you run Zoom? Are they able, do they have a webcam? Are they constrained by technical challenges? Can they not get their mute button off during a Zoom interview? I mean, there's lots of issues, and I'm sure you've run into some of them, that technical problems can interrupt. If you are doing an interview or focus group and you lose connection and now everybody is dispersed, can you bring them back together and really get that same quality of data? So there's challenges to the technology. Same thing with the data preparation. Are you able to prepare the data? Are you able to communicate the data? One thing also to add that I always say with challenges with online data collection is you are weeding out those who do not have access to a computer. This is one that tends to get left behind when looking at the challenges of online data collection. And so are we getting an actual normal distribution? Are we able to actually get a representative sample when we're only looking at people that have access to a computer or to a phone? Not everybody does. A lot of people do. And we make this as a requirement of maybe you have to have access to a computer. But then are we reading this out where those who don't have maybe the financial means, where they're not able to be represented? This came up a lot with COVID and with teaching is, did teachers who required students to participate online, was that weeding out people in low socioeconomic situations? So things to consider when we're looking at online data is, how does it translate to the online world? And does it all give us more access, or does it limit access? So there's always the pros and the cons. And when you're doing your research and when you're doing online data collection, you just want to make sure that you're taking these into consideration and that you are describing them or that you are explaining them, so that if you are, say, doing research and you're doing online interviews and you do have a technical problem, that you acknowledge that there were a few situations where some of your focus groups lost connection and you had to regroup again. And by meeting the second time, some of the newness of the group may have worn out, or the conversation may have been interrupted by other stimulus or control over the environment. So we just want to maintain an awareness of the choices that we make when designing online research. What are the pros? What are the cons and the challenges? And how are we going to account for them? So awareness is what's important here, is to be aware of these and to consider them when you're designing your research. Now, important again is the ethics in online research. So respect for autonomy and dignity of persons, scientific value, social responsibility. We're maximizing benefit and minimizing harm. So when we're having respect for the person, all right, and we're respecting the autonomy and the dignity of persons, and I don't know why I will constantly have automonoi, but I apologize for that. But regardless, respect for the autonomy. Is your data collection method secure? Okay, so when you collect data, where is that data going? Is it someplace that other people have access to? Or is the data that these people are sharing with you, is it in a secure place? Are you collecting data in a public setting? Is it on a discussion board, a chat room? Who else is seeing the data that you're collecting? Or is it done via a private communication like survey software or direct messaging or one-to-one interviews? When they're conducting the research, are they in a private or a public space? So if you're asking people to complete some sort of research method online, but they may not have access to a computer outside their home. So the example of, you were conducting an interview about spousal abuse via Zoom while that individual is in their home and their perpetrator of the abuse is nearby, are you putting them at risk? Right? Are they in a safe place? How is it that you're protecting the people that are participating in your study by protecting their data, by ensuring that they have privacy and autonomy and that they feel safe and comfortable? Not to mention, as a side note, your data could be compromised, but that's a side note. When it comes to ethics and the primary first step, we want to make sure that we are always keeping our participants safe and that we are protecting them and that we are valuing and giving them their dignity and their safety. So another ethical consideration for online research is the scientific value. So how much of that data collection can be controlled? Okay, who has the access to participate online versus not? Where is the participant who's completing the research? How is that participant responding to the study? So if you're asking difficult questions like spousal abuse or say about their children or grief, when data is collected online, we're not necessarily able to monitor the emotions or the range of the experience that they're having while collecting the study. We don't know if we're triggering somebody. We don't know if, let's say you're doing a study on suicidal ideation and you're doing it online. Well, what happens now if you look at the data and you're not doing it live, you're doing it asynchronously, and somebody has said that they feel like killing themselves right there, they're feeling highly suicidal. We have no way of in that moment moderating what they're experiencing or how they're perceiving it. So when we're looking at the scientific value, we want to make sure, yes, we're looking at the data collection, we're keeping in mind the autonomy of keeping somebody safe. And then also making sure that any emotions that they're having, any responses also to the technology, what are the pieces that are impacting the study, and can that compromise the scientific value? So does the technology impact the study? So again, if you are conducting your study and your technology breaks down, is that impacting your data? Does your ethical design and the way that you're looking to maintain ethics, but is it also compromising the data and ensuring that you are being ethical and that your study is adding scientific value and that your research is not so heavily flawed that it does not contribute scientific value? So important things to consider as you design your studies, whether they're being conducted online, that you're preserving the scientific value and that you're designing in such a way that you can say that you have followed all the ethical procedures and that your study is contributing and adds scientific value and is strong from an ethical perspective. So the social responsibility piece of ethics, we don't want to interfere to the point where it has a negative impact on the group. We're maintaining confidentiality and privacy again. And we want to consider how the publication of the research will impact the participants. So there's a couple of things to unpack here. So one is if you are observing or you're interacting, let's say a chat group, and you want to study cyberbullying. Well, we would not say that you should go in and start cyberbullying people to look for an impact. Right? That would have a negative impact, and you have the social responsibility not to go in and start cyberbullying people to see how they're impacted for your research. That would be an ethical challenge. Even though you could be anonymous and nobody knows that you're not a teenager, this would still not be conducive to research nor the social responsibility and ethical concerns. We want to maintain privacy and confidentiality. So if you are, say, observing a discussion board or a group, that we're not calling people out of, oh, this is an example of cyberbullying, I'm going to use this. Okay, this I've actually seen with gaming and chat rooms and gaming, if someone in a chat room saying, I'm observing this to look for bullying during gaming behaviors, and you wouldn't take down their gamer names, or there has to be some sort of preservation of privacy regardless of what activities they're doing. And then the publication of how that research will impact participants. And so this is important with a lot of times with small groups and interviews of, you may be working with a population that is pretty hard to find. And so let's say you're going to be publishing research and you're looking at a specific discussion group and you're saying, okay, I'm going to go and look at a chat room that is found on a website, and where the confidentiality and the privacy really becomes compromised, where anybody reading the article, it makes it easy for them to track down who the participants are or where the participants may have been found. And so the publication of that research could have a negative impact on those participants because we want to preserve their anonymity. But sometimes when we're finding especially hard to reach groups online, they may be actually easy to find. If you're saying I'm looking at online AA groups or online addiction support groups, well, those may actually have a negative impact on the participants because those people could be easy to find, or they could be something that, if depending on what you put in there, it's your social responsibility to ensure that you're not putting any identifying information while also appropriately describing the online environment. So it's a fine line. Will the publication of the research impact the participants in a negative way? So something that we want to consider is that social responsibility that we as researchers ethically have, both in the offline world when we're doing it, but also how this translates to an online arena. Maximizing benefits and minimizing harm. So we're preparing the research so that it is easy and convenient for participants, and that it's strongly designed so that they are able to complete it, that they're able to understand it, that they're able to not get frustrated and influenced by that. And then minimizing the harm. So you take that time to consider sensitive issues related to the research and the methods for participation, so that you're not, for that example of conducting research where you have somebody who is describing their spousal abuse when their spouse could be in the next room. We want to minimize that harm and just be aware, especially when conducting sensitive data that could be triggering for somebody or could potentially put them in harm. So again, we are following the ethics when we're taking things that we already know and we've already discussed about the ethics of conducting research. And as we go through looking at the different the different dynamics of online research, so doing a lot of the transitional approach of how does the current research that we use and the landscape that we use when designing research, how does that translate online? And is there anything unique as a cyber psychologist that you're able to identify that may not translate very well to the online realm? Or what are some considerations that you might have to take, that if somebody reports suicidal ideation when you're interviewing them via Zoom, that you may not be able to control if they just disconnect the Zoom and leave, versus say they're sitting in your office or in a laboratory setting? What can we do to help alleviate some of the benefit harm ratio and make sure that we are remaining ethical and following all ethical guidelines? So we remember how to behave online. And so this comes into the communication piece. And that when you think about this disassociation that we can have of, we sometimes forget that there is somebody else on the other side of the screen. And so we need to remember the human, right? And adhere to the same standards of online behaviors that we would follow in real life, to be professional, to be friendly, to be welcome, to follow the ethical behaviors, to know where you are in cyberspace, to understand the difference between, say, a video meeting versus a chat room, versus a discussion board, versus a group. Okay, what are the nuances of the different areas of cyberspace that may impact the way that you communicate to people? We want to have respect for other people's time. We want to make ourselves look good online. This doesn't just mean taking care of your hair and putting on a nice outfit, but you want to be able to communicate well. You want to represent, if you're, say, with a university or with a research group, you want to make yourself look good and speak well and represent yourself well online. You share your knowledge. You do not want to let flame wars, especially if you are in a discussion group or anything akin to that, or in, say, a gaming chat room, or people start getting heated or upset. You want to help diffuse that and not create, again, harmful situations. We want to minimize anything that's harm. We're respecting other people's privacy. We're not abusing our powers as researchers. We're forgiving of other people's mistakes, especially if they don't know how to behave online, or they're trying to understand the technology, or they don't unmute the button. Okay, we've all been there. And so we're forgiving of each other's mistakes, especially in an online arena where we may not know all of the rules or be as comfortable. For some people, they're not as familiar with interacting online. And then, of course, that I always remember of all caps is considered shouting. So we don't type at people with all caps, but we are forgiving if somebody does so to us. And just to be aware of the subtleties of behaving online. And as you study cyber psychology, these things that will continue to be brought up of how does the online world differ from, say, face-to-face? And when we're conducting research, when we're interacting, when we're communicating, what are the nuances of this that can impact the interactions and the relationships we have with people based on our online behavior and based on the way that we handle ourselves online? So this is the basic introduction to online research, and we'll dig deep into the different types and different modules, but to have the awareness that the ethical considerations must still be maintained, and that to know how online research can influence or affect the ethical practices. Are there different things that you need to consider when you're transitioning something to an online realm? And then what type of online research is it? Are you taking something that already exists and putting it online? Are you studying the internet itself? So these are things just as an introduction to the things that we want to consider whenever conducting online research. And if you have any questions, feel free to email me. Thank you.